I want to start with a morning. Not a dramatic morning. Not the morning of a battle or a ceremony or a moment that announces itself as significant. A Tuesday morning. 4:37 a.m. Fort Jackson, South Carolina. The alarm did not wake me because I had not been asleep. I had been lying on a bunk that was narrower than anything I had ever slept on in my 22 years of life, staring at the ceiling 3 feet above my face, listening to the specific, collective breathing of 47 other women in the same room, some of them asleep, some of them doing exactly what I was doing, which was lying very still and thinking about what was going to happen when the lights came on. The lights came on at 4:45. The first morning of basic training. I want to tell you what happened in the 11 seconds between the lights coming on and my feet hitting the floor. I thought about my mother's kitchen. The specific smell of it in the morning. Coffee and something warm. The sound of the radio she kept on the counter that played the same station every morning, a station that played a specific combination of gospel and R&B that I had grown up inside and that had become, without my knowing it, the specific sound of safety. I thought about my mother's kitchen for 11 seconds. Then my feet hit the floor. And basic training began. And nothing I had prepared myself for was sufficient for what the next 16 weeks were going to require. My name is Sergeant First Class Elena Graves. United States Army. And this is the story of what military training actually does to you. Not the version you see in the commercials. Not the version with the dramatic music and the silhouettes against the sunrise. The real version. The one that happens at 4:45 in the morning when you are lying on a narrow bunk thinking about your mother's kitchen and you do not know yet what the next 16 weeks are going to take from you. Or what they are going to build. If you are new here, please subscribe right now and drop your country and local time in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me begin. Underscore 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 underscore. I was 22 years old when I arrived at Fort Jackson. I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, the oldest of 3 children, in a household run by my mother Gloria, a woman who worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood and who raised 3 children with the specific, relentless love of someone who has decided that difficulty is not an excuse and that her children are going to have what they need regardless of what it costs her to provide it. My father left when I was 9. Not dramatically. He simply stopped coming home. And then he stopped calling. And then he was gone in the specific, quiet way that some people leave, not with a scene but with an absence that grows until the absence is the shape of the thing that used to be there. My mother did not allow us to be defined by the absence. She was defined by her presence. I have tried, every day of my adult life, to be defined the same way. I enlisted at 21. Not because I had no other options. I had a partial scholarship to the University of Alabama that I had deferred and eventually gave up. I enlisted because somewhere in the specific, practical world of a girl raised by a working mother in Birmingham, the Army made sense in a way that felt clean and unambiguous. You showed up. You did the work. You were measured by what you actually did. I understood that framework. I arrived at Fort Jackson on a Monday in July with 1 bag, the specific nervous energy of someone who has made an irreversible decision and is standing on the other side of it for the first time, and a level of physical fitness that I believed, incorrectly, as I was about to discover, was sufficient. Underscore 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 underscore. The first week. I need to tell you about the first week because the first week is where most of what I know about myself was learned and most of what I believed about myself was wrong. I believed I was tough. I had grown up tough. The specific toughness of someone raised by a woman who worked 2 jobs and who understood that complaining was not a useful activity and that the gap between where you were and where you needed to be was crossed by working and not by waiting. I was tough. I was not military tough. Those are not the same thing. Military tough is a specific kind. Not stronger than civilian tough, not necessarily. But differently oriented. It is the toughness of someone who has been stripped of every mechanism they have ever used to regulate their emotional state and who has had to find new ones under conditions that actively resist the finding. Let me be specific. Day 1. They took our phones. Not metaphorically. Literally. We surrendered our phones at reception and they were placed in a bag with our name on it, and the bag went somewhere we were not going to be for 16 weeks. I want to tell you what losing your phone on the first day of basic training actually feels like. Not the inconvenience of it. I had expected the inconvenience. The specific, physical sensation of reaching for something that is not there. I reached for my phone 47 times on the first day. I counted because counting was something to do when the reaching came and found nothing. 47 times. The phone was how I talked to my mother. The phone was the connection to everything I had been before I arrived at that reception desk. Without it I was, and this is the most honest way I can say it, untethered in a way I had not been since I was 9 years old and my father's absence became permanent. I did not cry. I did not cry on day 1. I did not cry until day 4. Day 4 was the day of the first real physical evolution. Not the warm-up exercises of days 1 through 3, those had been demanding but manageable, the specific, graduated difficulty of people who understand that you have to build capacity before you can test it. Day 4 was the day they tested it. A 5-mile run. Full gear. At 5 in the morning. In July. In South Carolina. I want to tell you something about July in South Carolina that you need to understand before you understand what a 5-mile run in full gear at 5 in the morning in July in South Carolina actually is. July in South Carolina is a specific kind of heat. Not the dry heat of desert places that people sometimes describe as tolerable. The wet heat of a coastal southern state in midsummer, the kind that sits on you like a physical weight, that makes the air feel thick, that your lungs have to work slightly harder to process than they would in any other place. At 5 in the morning in July in South Carolina it is already 82 degrees. It is already 82% humidity. And we ran. I want to tell you what mile 3 felt like. Mile 1 I was okay. Not comfortable, there is no comfortable in this, but managing. The specific, functional management of someone who is trained for this and whose body is doing what she has prepared it to do. Mile 2 I was working. The distinction between managing and working is specific and important. Managing is when your body is performing the task and your mind is available to observe the performance. Working is when your body is struggling with the task and your mind has been recruited into the struggle. By mile 2 my mind was fully recruited. Mile 3. Mile 3 is where I understood something about myself that I had not known before. I understood that there is a place past exhaustion that is not more exhaustion. It is something else. A place where the body is doing what it is doing not because it has the resources to do it but because something else has taken over from the resources. Something more fundamental than energy or strength or endurance. Something that is either there or it is not. At mile 3 in the heat and the humidity with 2 miles still to go I found out whether it was there. It was there. I do not know what to call it. Will is too simple a word. Stubbornness is closer but still not right. It is something more specific than either, the specific quality of someone who has decided, at the cellular level, that stopping is not available as an option. I finished the 5 miles. I finished last in my platoon. And as I crossed what I understood to be the finish point I bent over with my hands on my knees and I breathed for approximately 30 seconds. Then I looked up. Drill Sergeant Harris was standing in front of me. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall. She had been in the army for 14 years. She had a voice that operated at a volume and a precision that I had not previously encountered in another human being. She looked at me. She said, Graves. I said, Drill Sergeant. She said, Last. I said, Yes, Drill Sergeant. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, You finished? Yes, Drill Sergeant. She said nothing else. She walked away. That was the first lesson. Finishing last is not failing. Not finishing is failing. I have thought about that lesson every day since. Underscore 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 underscore. Week 2. Week 2 was when the crying started. Not my crying, I will tell you about my crying in its own time. The collective crying. The specific, communal grief of 48 women who have had every comfort stripped away and who are in the process of discovering what they are made of without those comforts. It happened at night. After lights out. The room would be dark and the day would be finished, and for approximately 90 minutes before sleep took most of us there would be, not silence. The specific sound of women trying to cry quietly. The controlled, muffled quality of grief that is trying not to be heard. I lay in my bunk and I listened to it. The woman in the bunk below me was named Tasha. She was 19 years old. She had come from Atlanta. She cried every night for the first 3 weeks with the specific, quiet consistency of someone who has found the one place in a 16-hour day where they are allowed to feel something and who is using every minute of it. I did not cry for the first 9 days. I want to tell you why. Not because I was not feeling what the others were feeling. I was feeling exactly what they were feeling, the homesickness, the exhaustion, the specific, ground-level grief of someone who has given up everything familiar and has not yet found anything to replace it with. I did not cry because crying felt like admitting that I had made a mistake. And I had not made a mistake. I was certain of that. I was certain of it in the specific, stubborn way of someone who has made an irreversible decision and who understands that the only direction available is forward. On day 10 I cried. Not at night. In the shower, the 3-minute shower that was the one daily moment of relative privacy in a day that otherwise had none. 3 minutes. I used approximately 90 seconds of it to cry. The specific, compressed, efficient crying of someone who has exactly 90 seconds and is going to use them correctly. Then I rinsed. Then I got out. I never cried longer than 90 seconds in a shower for the rest of basic training. I am not proud of this. I am also not ashamed of it. It was what I had. And I used it. Underscore 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 underscore. Week 3 was the week I almost quit. I want to tell you about this carefully because I think it is the most important part of what I am telling you, and I think it deserves honesty rather than the version of this story where almost quitting does not happen. It happened. Week 3, Day 4. We had been in the field for 48 hours. Not the comfortable field of training exercises where you know the schedule and you know the endpoint. The specific, sustained field evolution that is designed to test not your physical capacity, that had been tested in week 1, but your psychological endurance. The capacity to continue when you do not know how long continuing is going to be required. I had not slept in 41 hours. I had been cold and wet and had performed tasks that required precision while cold and wet and had not slept in 41 hours. And on the morning of day 4 of week 3 I sat in the mud at the edge of a training area and I thought about the process for withdrawing from basic training. I knew the process. Everyone knew the process. It was not hidden. You could go to the drill sergeant and you could say the words and the process would begin, and in a specific number of hours you would be on a bus and then on a plane and then you would be home. I sat in the mud and I thought about my mother's kitchen. Not the way I had thought about it on the first morning, not as a comfort. As a destination. I could be there in 36 hours. I sat with that for a long time. Then something happened that I have never told anyone and that I am telling you now because this is the story of what basic training actually does to you, and leaving it out would make the story incomplete. I took off my left boot. Not to quit. To look at my foot. My foot was blistered in a way that I had been managing for 8 days by not looking at it. By simply continuing. By applying the specific, necessary ignorance of someone who understands that looking at certain things too carefully makes the continuing harder. I looked at it. It was not good. The specific, honest assessment of someone who has been trained since childhood to assess situations accurately. It was not good. I put my boot back on. And I stood up. Not from inspiration. Not from a specific, motivating thought that arrived and changed my direction. I stood up because sitting in the mud was not going to make my foot better or make the 41 hours of no sleep shorter or make the remaining weeks fewer. Sitting in the mud was just sitting in the mud. I stood up. I picked up my gear. I rejoined the formation. Drill Sergeant Harris saw me rejoin. She said nothing. She looked at me for 1 second. Then she looked away. That was the second lesson. The decision to continue is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply standing up from the mud. Underscore 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 underscore. Week 4. Something shifted in week 4. Not comfort, I want to be precise. There was no comfort in week 4. The physical demands had not decreased and the sleep deficit had not been recovered and the homesickness had not resolved. But something shifted. The best way I can describe it is this. In the first 3 weeks I was fighting against basic training. In week 4 I stopped fighting against it. Not surrendering to it. Not accepting what it was doing to me passively. But the specific, enormous energy expenditure of resisting, of spending mental and emotional resources on the resistance itself rather than on the performance, that stopped. I stopped spending energy on wishing I was somewhere else. I redirected it toward being where I was. The effect was, immediate is not the right word. Gradual is not right either. The specific quality of something that happens over a period of days that you only fully recognize in retrospect, when you look back at where the shift started and can see the before and after from a distance that was not available while you were inside it. I started to be good at basic training. Not the top performer, I was not the fastest or the strongest or the most technically precise. But consistently solid. The specific, reliable quality of someone who shows up fully to every evolution and who does not have large variance between her best days and her worst. Drill Sergeant Harris noticed. She noticed in the specific, economical way of military leadership, not with praise, not with acknowledgement, but with the assignment of tasks that communicated that she had assessed me and found something she could use. She made me a squad leader. Not because I was exceptional. Because I was reliable. I have thought about the distinction between exceptional and reliable many times since then, and I have arrived at this conclusion. Exceptional gets noticed. Reliable gets trusted. Both matter. But in the specific, sustained environment of military service, trusted is the one you want to be. Underscore 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 underscore. Week 6. I want to tell you about a letter. My mother wrote to me every week from the time I arrived at basic training. Not emails, the Army provided a portal for electronic communication that was available to us in limited windows. My mother used the portal occasionally. but primarily she wrote letters. On paper. In her handwriting that I have known since I learned to read. The letters arrived in batches. The mail system at Fort Jackson was not daily, and when a batch arrived it was a specific event in the day. The drill sergeants distributed mail with the specific, controlled ceremony of people who understand that mail is significant and who do not diminish its significance by making it casual. Your name was called. You went forward. You received your letter. You went back to your bunk. My name was called in week 6. I went forward. I received a letter. I went back to my bunk. I sat on the edge of the bunk with the letter in my hands for approximately 3 minutes before I opened it. Not because I was afraid of what was inside it. Because I knew that what was inside it was from my mother and I needed a moment before my mother's handwriting and my mother's words entered the specific, stripped, rawer than normal version of me that basic training had produced. I opened it. She wrote about ordinary things. My sister's school project. The neighbor's dog. A television show she had started watching. The specific, domestic inventory of a life being lived in Birmingham while I was in Fort Jackson. And at the end she wrote one paragraph that I have carried every day since. She wrote, Elena. I have been thinking about what you are doing and I have been thinking about who you are. And I want to tell you something I should have said more when you were growing up. You have always been the person who stood back up. Every time something knocked you down, and things knocked you down, the way they knock everyone down, you stood back up. Not always quickly. Not always without crying first. But always. You always stood back up. I have watched you do it your whole life. I am watching you do it now from here. And I want you to know that I am not surprised. I always knew you were going to stand back up. I just want you to know that I was watching, and I was proud of you before you had a uniform to show for it, and I am proud of you now. I read it twice. Then I folded it. I put it in the specific, small container that I kept personal items in. I did not cry. I sat for a moment and I felt something that I do not have a precise word for, the specific, warm, stabilizing feeling of being seen by someone who has known you long enough to see you accurately. My mother had known me long enough. She saw me accurately. That was week 6. Underscore 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 underscore. Weeks 7 through 12. I want to give these weeks together not because they were undramatic, they were not undramatic, but because what was happening in them was a sustained process rather than a series of specific events, and I want to describe the process rather than the events. The process was becoming a soldier. Not finishing basic training, that was the end point. The process of becoming, which is different. I want to try to describe what becoming feels like from the inside because I think it is not what people expect. It does not feel like achievement. It feels like subtraction. One by one, the things that are not essential are removed. Not dramatically. Through the specific, sustained pressure of an environment that does not have space for the inessential. The need for approval. I had not known how much energy I spent seeking approval until the environment made approval irrelevant. The drill sergeants were not there to approve of me. They were there to assess me and to train me, and the two things are very different from each other. I stopped seeking approval and redirected the energy. The fear of failure. Not the fear of making mistakes. Mistakes happened constantly and the correction of them was the mechanism of learning. But the specific, energy-consuming fear of being seen to fail. Of other people witnessing failure. Of failure being on the record. In basic training, failure is constant and visible and responded to immediately, and that immediacy of response removes the shame from it. You fail. You are corrected. You try again. There is no space for the specific, private shame of someone who is afraid to be seen failing because the failing is immediate and the correction is immediate and the forward movement is immediate, and by the time you have time to be ashamed the moment has passed. I stopped being afraid of visible failure. The belief that I needed to feel ready before I began. I had spent my entire life waiting to feel ready. Before tests. Before important conversations. Before decisions. Basic training does not wait for you to feel ready. It arrives at 4:45 in the morning and it proceeds regardless of your readiness, and you perform regardless of your readiness, and you discover that readiness is not a feeling that precedes action. Readiness is a capacity that is built by action. You do not feel ready and then act. You act and then find that you were more ready than you felt. I have not waited to feel ready since week 9 of basic training. Underscore 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 underscore. Week 14. Tasha. The woman from the bunk below mine who had cried every night for the first 3 weeks. By week 14 Tasha was one of the strongest performers in our platoon. Not the fastest, she had never been the fastest. But the most consistent. The one who showed up with the same quality every single day regardless of what the previous day had been. I had watched her transform over 14 weeks. Not dramatically, gradually, the way the real transformations happen. On the evening of week 14 we were sitting outside the barracks in the specific, brief window of unstructured time that occasionally appeared at the end of a day, and she said something that I want to tell you. She said, "Elena. Do you remember the first night?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I thought I was going to die." I said, "I know. I could hear you." She was quiet for a moment. "You never cried," she said. "I cried," I said. "In the shower. Every time." She looked at me. "The shower," she said. 3 minutes, I said. "I used 90 seconds. She laughed. The specific laugh of someone who recognizes something true in what they have heard. "That is the most you thing I have ever heard," she said. "Efficient," I said. "Terrifying," she said. We sat in the specific quiet of 2 people who have been through something together and who understand each other in the way that shared difficulty produces. Then she said, "What do you think it did to us? All of this?" I thought about it. "I think it subtracted things," I said. "What things?" she said. "The things that were taking up space without serving anything," I said. "The things I was carrying that I did not know I was carrying." She was quiet. "What was I carrying?" she said. "That I'm not carrying now?" I looked at her. At the 19-year-old from Atlanta who had cried every night for 3 weeks and who was now sitting beside me with the specific, earned composure of someone who has discovered what she is made of. The belief, I said, that comfort is the baseline. That the default state of life is supposed to be comfortable. And that when it is not comfortable something has gone wrong. She looked at me. "What is the baseline?" she said. "The work," I said. "The work is the baseline. And comfort, real comfort, the kind that means something, that comes after the work. Not before." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I wish someone had told me that before I got here." "They could not have," I said. "You have to learn it this way." "Why?" she said. "Because," I said, "if they told you before you arrived, you would believe it in your head. Not in your body. And this kind of knowing has to be in your body." She nodded. The slow, specific nod of someone absorbing something real. Underscore 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 underscore. Graduation. Basic training graduation at Fort Jackson. A ceremony. Families allowed in for the first time. My mother drove from Birmingham. She arrived on the day before graduation with my sister and my youngest brother, who was 7 years old and who had been told by my mother that we were going to watch Elena graduate, and who had understood this as a major event in the way that 7-year-olds understand major events, completely, without complication, with the specific, pure excitement of someone who loves you and is coming to see you. He ran to me when he saw me in the staging area before the ceremony. He ran with the specific, full-speed commitment of a 7-year-old who has decided that the gap between himself and the person he loves needs to be closed immediately. He hit me at approximately 30 miles an hour. I held him. He said into my shoulder, "You look different." I said, "Different how?" He pulled back and looked at me. He said, "Bigger." I said, "I am the same size." He said, "No. Not bigger like that. Bigger like." He scrunched up his face in the specific concentration of a 7-year-old trying to articulate something he does not fully have words for. He said, "Bigger like more of you is showing." I looked at my 7-year-old brother. At the child who had been 6 months old when my father stopped coming home. Who had grown up in the same household of absence and presence that I had grown up in. Who had my mother's eyes and my grandmother's laugh and the specific, perceptive quality of children who grow up in households where you learn early to read the room. "More of you is showing," he had said. He was right. That was what 16 weeks had done. Not added anything. Removed the things that had been in the way of what was already there. My mother found me after the ceremony. She held me the way she had held me at every significant moment of my childhood, completely, with both arms, without the managed restraint of public hugging. She held me like she meant it. I held her back. Then she stepped back. She looked at me. She said the same thing she had written in the letter. "I was proud of you before you had the uniform," she said. "I want you to know I meant that." I said, "I know you meant it." "Do you feel it?" she said. I thought about the 4:45 mornings. About mile 3 in the July heat. About the mud and the wet and the 41 hours without sleep. About 90 seconds in the shower. About the letter. About Tasha's cry and my 7-year-old brother's specific articulation of something he did not fully have words for. I said, "Yes. I feel it." She nodded. She took my face in both of her hands, the same gesture her mother had used, the same gesture I would use with my own children someday. She said, "Good. Now you know." "Now I know," I said. Underscore 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 underscore. I am 31 years old now. Sergeant First Class Elena Graves. I have served 9 years since that first 4:45 morning at Fort Jackson. I have been deployed twice. I have been promoted 4 times. I have trained soldiers, female and male, who have gone on to their own deployments and their own 4:45 mornings and their own miles in the heat and their own mud and their own 90-second shower cries. Every one of them has come to me at some point and said some version of the same thing. They said they did not know. They said nobody told them what it was actually going to be. I tell them this. Nobody can tell you. Not because the people who have been through it are withholding. But because the thing that basic training does is not describable in advance in a way that is useful. The description lands differently than the experience. The description is information. The experience is knowledge. And the distinction between those two things is the whole of what I am trying to tell you. You can know everything about what is going to happen. You will not know what it is going to do to you until it is doing it. And what it is going to do to you is going to be the most specific and most real and most important thing that has ever been done to you. It is going to subtract what is not essential. It is going to show you what is underneath. And what is underneath? If you stand up from the mud, if you finish last, if you use 90 seconds in the shower and walk back out, what is underneath is more than you thought was there. It is always more than you thought was there. Underscore 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 underscore. I want to say one final thing. To any woman who is considering this path. Not because women need a different version of what I have told you, we do not. The mud is the same mud. The heat is the same heat. The 4:45 mornings are the same mornings. But because I was a woman in a room with 47 other women at 4:45 in the morning and I know what it looked like from the inside, and I want someone who is considering the inside to hear this from someone who was there. You are going to be afraid. The fear is not a sign that you are not ready. It is a sign that you understand what you are walking into. Walk in anyway. You are going to cry. Not because you are weak. Because you are human and you have been stripped of everything familiar, and crying is the honest response to that, and the honest response is the right one. Cry. Use 90 seconds if that is what you have. Use 3 minutes if you have 3 minutes. Then get back out there. You are going to find the place past exhaustion. And in that place you are going to discover something about yourself that you could not have discovered any other way. That you were always more than you thought you were. You just needed the mud to show you. Underscore 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 underscore. Drop the word standing in the comments if this story reached something real in you. Standing for what you do after the mud. Standing for what my mother always knew I was going to do. And if you are new here, subscribe. Every single day I share a new story about family, about service, about the people who stood back up. I will see you in the next one. Kayla's Dark Truth.